On this week's episode of the Geek State, Firefly is back in the news as Fox Execs talk about a relaunch.
CES 2020 has electric cars, boring tech for parents, and some things you might actually be interested in.
And James and I finally get deep and talk about Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. All that and more on this episode of the Geek State.
Yes. Yes. This is a fertile land, and we will thrive. We will rule over all this land, and we will call it this land. I think we should call it your grave. Curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal.
Stand by alert.
This is it.
These are the droids you are looking for. This is the Geek State.
Welcome everybody to 2020 and a brand new episode of the Geek State. My name is Chris, and joining me as always, my buddy James. James, sir, how are you tonight?
I'm doing very well, Christopher. How are you?
I'm good. It's weird when you take a little break. You know, we had the holidays with Christmas and New Year's and all the sports ball and stuff on TV. That's so obnoxious, sports ball. Anyways, like the college football stuff is big. No, me saying
big college football news. Oh, you saying it? Yeah. Big college football news. We now have Joe Moorhead out at Mississippi State. Mike Leach in, inventor of the air raid offense. Very exciting for James Kelly next year. That's my
me too.
That's my college football 12 seconds.
Stuart out there listens to the show, and he is also a Mississippi State fan. So shout out to Stuart from Techno Retro Dads and Mississippi State. So good for you guys. You're here for the geek stuff, and that's what we're here for. And we've got stuff from movies, and CES is going on. If you're a Firefly fan, there might be a little bit of chance to be excited just a little bit. It's okay to kind of get your hopes up just a little bit. We'll talk about that. But first, one of the things I wanted to make note of is this is our 1-year anniversary as the Geek State. Now, if you're a longtime listener, you know we had another podcast called S'more Geeks, and that was on for, I think, 5 years. But this past week marked our 1-year anniversary, and we're really excited that you're along here still with us on this journey. And also, if you're coming to our podcast, if you found us through the website Podchaser, which if you've not heard about Podchaser, it is basically like IMDb for podcasts. So if you have specific creators that you really like that do podcasts and you want to see, like, you know, maybe they guest appeared on another podcast and you want to find out where they are, or you want to follow a specific podcast, create your own podcast list and share it and give ratings. You can actually, what's nice about this, and this is not a plug, they're not paying me to do this. It's just that we've picked up a lot of followers from Podchaser, and I was like, well, you know, let's bring some light to this. You can rate individual episodes as well. So it's not just you don't have to review just the full scope of the show. If you like a episode in particular, those episodes that have the most ratings and the most positivity get shared up top under a best episode area, which is a great way for people who are discovering shows to find, you know, maybe the best episodes of that series. So if you're like in the market for looking for other shows besides us, like a true crime podcast, like not another geek show.
Yeah, a second podcast. Let's be very clear about this. Like the one that kind of sits in the queue, like just in case, you know, ours comes out a day late, something like that. These types of situations. We demand to be number one.
Right. Currently, if you go to podchaser.com and you hit podcasts, we are number 2. Through some sort of magic and through begging and asking everybody that likes the show to give us a rating and review. So thank you for that. And if you haven't, head over to podchaser.com, create an account, and give us some likes, give us some stars and some kind words. And it's just a cool place to follow the people that you love, especially if you're, you know, a really, really big fan of podcasts in general. Podchaser is pretty rad. I like it. There's been a lot of Star Wars, and we're going to spend a lot of time tonight, today, this morning, whenever you're listening to the show, talking about Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. We're also going to talk about The Mandalorian now that that's all wrapped up, and just give kind of our thoughts and feelings of the specifics. We'll get nitty gritty. We'll share spoilers. So if it's something that you haven't seen yet somehow, then when we get to that point in the show, press pause and come back later. But if you're listening to the show, I can't imagine you've not seen Star Wars yet. It's almost $1 billion at the box office at this point. Before we get onto the news headlines, and if you haven't seen any of these yet, then we'll just move right along. But James, have you had a chance to see? There's been a couple trailers, some in the superhero genre that have recently come out. The first being the trailer for Marvel's The New Mutants, and then also today, as of recording, the Birds of Prey final trailer came out. I
did not see New Mutants. I did see the Birds of Prey trailer, and I'm still very confused about that movie.
I was going to ask, let's talk about that, because I've got a couple thoughts on the New Mutants. But before we get to the news headlines, I think this trailer did a much better job of giving us a story that it kind of sets the stage, because they've got Margot Robbie like providing some background narration where it's like, hold on, how did we get to this point? Very almost Deadpool,
right?
Which is, did you get that vibe too?
I got that vibe very much. I believe the fourth wall will be broken a couple times in this film. I think you're going to be in the middle of conversations and she'll be like, wait a second. And then it'll go to like something else going on. But I think that's going to happen in this movie, just based off the trailers. But it did add a little bit more exposition as to who these people were, outside of just knowing that it's like the Huntress or like whatever. But yeah, so that's interesting. I did think that the bit where she hid behind the cocaine and they shot the cocaine and she clearly inhaled some, I thought that was funny. So that kind of got me excited if they continue with, humor like that. Me, I love a good angel dust gag.
Well, and DC has announced that this is, I guess Warner Brothers has announced that this is going to be, they're going to just go with a rated R.
Yes.
Obviously Joker, influenced that decision, which kind of also made me feel like, it's kind of leaning into this Deadpool, something about it. Like there's something about how that trailer was cut and the humor that's used. They're both very irreverent characters to begin with. So it does make sense just anyways for Harley Quinn to act, a certain way. But I gotta say, I am a little bit more excited for this than I was for the initial like Suicide Squad.
Yeah, I would agree that is 100% true. I'm more interested in this, but I don't know that it's going to be much better. I guess it's really,
it definitely looks more fun.
Yes, that's for sure. And you can tell that just by the name. It's like something, Birds of Prey, the fantabulous emancipation of Harley Quinn or something like that.
Of one Harley Quinn.
Yeah,
something.
It's great.
Something like that.
Great.
The other one that you probably haven't seen is Marvel's New Mutants. Now, this is like a Fox, people I think might get confused, thinking like, oh, this is a new Marvel movie, and because now Fox and Disney, like this is going to be something from the MCU. So if you're listening out there and you didn't know this is legit like a 3-year-old movie that just never has been released, that the release date keeps getting pushed back and back and back. And then of course the merger happened. And then there was a lot of questions whether this movie would even see the light of day, because the first trailer came out in 2017. Yeah. And it was really dark. It did not look or feel like anything related to mutants at all, except I think the word mutants was mentioned. This trailer, though, I will say, knowing that it's still a Fox Marvel type thing and expectations to be set where they should be, it definitely does a much better job of saying like, these are mutants that are being held at this like institution, and they're basically trapped there and being like tortured.
This is when the trailer's kind of like it's almost like a horror movie.
Absolutely.
Okay. I did see this trailer. It's got Maisie Williams. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes. Good thing she doesn't age. Otherwise people would be very thrown off as to why a 12-year-old is in this movie.
Yeah, exactly. She looks pretty much the same. I mean, if you go back to the first season of Game of Thrones, it's just,
right.
Clearly she's much younger, but I think this one looks better. I will definitely not see this in theaters. Well, actually, you know what? I can, because I have the unlimited pass, which by the way is working out extremely well. Definitely used it to see Star Wars a few times over the Christmas break. All right. So those are some trailers, some cool stuff going on. One thing that I do want to mention, I don't feel like it's a news headline, but I want to kind of get your take on this, is that Warner Brothers has announced this thing about having this AI system that will help them determine the profitability of a film in different regions of the world. Like basically, like if you cast Scarlett Johansson in this movie, she'll do really good in Ohio and blah, 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 blah. You know, like, what is your take on studios using this kind of AI tool to help them decide pictures to make?
Well, Chris, I could go into a very large conversation about why artificial intelligence and robotics terrifies the shit out of me. However, we won't do that today.
We won't.
I've just read a lot. I've listened to a lot of interviews in which people are making jokes, being jovial about the fact that you don't need to worry about a artificial intelligence beating the Turing test. You need to worry about artificial intelligence being so smart that it lies about not being able to beat the Turing test. That terrifies me. I don't like that.
That's scary.
I don't like that idea. I've seen movies, Ex Machina, things like that terrify me about this. However, if you were just using it to predict movies, sure, do it. Whatever makes you think that you're going to sell more tickets or whatever. I'm trying to think of. I can't imagine that. It's.
Scarlett Johansson is every character in this movie, you know, like,
yeah.
I'm wondering what it kind of works like. If you're in the casting department, you go up to the computer and you type, okay, it's a science fiction film. It's one potential cast is this. Yeah,
it's like one of those. Blah, 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 blah. It's like video game dev tycoon the game or whatever. You know what I mean? Where you're like, yes, you can make a platformer game in space. Up. What's it called? Up. Here's how much. Well, it sells. You know, that type of thing. It's like there's so many factors that you would have to put into it. Like how much money are you spending on it? You know, who's directing it? It's just like.
What's just the social climate at the time too?
Yeah, whatever.
It's stupid. It's so dumb.
If they want to waste a lot of money on that, well, a lot about Hollywood is very dumb. So, Agreed. If they want to waste a lot of money on something like that, by all means, as long as it doesn't cost more for me to go see a movie. Well, Chris, it is a new year, new me, new you, same podcast. Great news. We have Consumer Electronics Show going on right now. I feel like for some reason this is way earlier than it usually is, but I may be way off on that.
I thought that too, but it's around the beginning of the year every year.
Interesting. But there hasn't been a ton of news that we would talk about from this. Sony had a big press conference that a lot of people waited in line for. They showed off an electronic car and a PS5 logo that looks just like the PS4 logo if you backspace the 4 and add a 5. But one thing that did pop up that is a little bit kind of in our lane, being that you had the Game Boy clone system and you enjoyed that. We know that there's another Game Boy, which is a hardware system, so it isn't emulating anything, that is coming out next year, I believe. And Hyperkin has announced that they have a tiny little cube console that is going to be specifically for Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance. This is a console that hooks up to your TV, HDMI, 720p. We don't have a price on this yet. It's called the Retron Junior. I'm not super excited about this. This doesn't do much for me. I have a Retron 5 already, which already does Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance.
That was what I was going to ask, because we've got one too. Yeah. And I was like, it plays like everything. I'm sure it plays Game Boy stuff.
It does. There's a Game Boy slot on the very front of it. In my brain, so few people are interested in playing Game Boy games that don't also own SNES carts or NES carts or Genesis carts. Like, I don't think that there's if you did a Venn diagram, it would almost be two overlapping circles, right?
What if it's like $39 though?
If it is that's exactly what I was going to say. If you're talking about something that's in that $30 or $40 price point, that could be perfect for those same people, being that they already have the original consoles for the NES, the SNES, and they just want a way to play their Game Boy games on the TV that isn't. I guess if you have SNES, you could use this Super Game Boy, and then obviously for the GameCube, they have the Game Boy Player, but that can be expensive. I think that's $100 right there just for the Game Boy Player. Right. So, because you need that stupid little disc. Anywho, so true. Just keep an eye out. Some people sell Game Boy Players for very cheap, and it sounds like a good idea, but it doesn't come with the disc. So, if you don't have the disc, it's literally something you just attach to the bottom of a GameCube.
It's worthless.
Exactly. Or it's a great storage system for one Game Boy cartridge.
Keeps it real safe.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah. yeah, so they've got this thing coming out. It's going to be exciting. One other thing that I know you wanted to discuss a little bit was going to be arcade 1-up cabinets.
Yeah.
They had a big showing, including a 16-foot tall cabinet of NBA Jam. That you had to get up on a ladder. The controls were the same size, but for some reason they just made a giant cabinet. It's very interesting.
It's a good attention grabber from across the convention hall, for sure. They had, all the folks working at the arcade 1-up were wearing like basketball jersey looking stuff. Mm-hmm. There was some really cool stuff. They had some new things. I don't have any of these. I don't feel like they're in my they're not on my wish list, I think, because just space requirements, alone, or they're big, but they had two things that really caught my eye. The first one is they already have the Star Wars arcade game that you can buy, the stand-up one. And it comes with a riser to make it a little higher so you can stand while you play it. But now you can, they're going to be selling essentially it's a bench. But it's so you can play the game sitting down, which is how I remember playing this game at the Showbiz Pizza that I played at. They had a sit down version of that cabinet, and it's a cool. It doesn't have the full like roof and stuff. It's just it's a nice bench that slides close to the machine when you're not playing it, and you just slide it out, and then you can play it sitting down in that kind of style. And the other thing, which I had never thought about them going into, is they have digital pinball. So they have these, stand up pinball games with the physical buttons on the side and all that. But when you look down into the cabinet, recessed a few inches down is a screen, and they've got like the digital pinball, kind of like that Zen, the Zen pinball games that they've got, which the Star Wars ones are really good. I don't think this is at all related to them. But I could be wrong because I only saw images of this, but those are going to retail for about $600. Little pricey. That is
a growing community, though, the virtual pinball community. I am actually thinking about dipping my toe in. It is a little expensive to get in. But there are thousands of tables that are free online that people have either built. A lot of people have reproduced tables. They've taken stock photos and things like that, or actual people's cabinets. And there's an editor where people go in and build their own pinball tables, and they recreate these pinball tables to very detailed lengths.
I had no idea.
I'm looking into dipping my toe into that, but we will see how that goes because, like I said, it is kind of pricey to get into. But assuming you would be able to take the arcade 1-up cabinet and convert it into, side loading your own things onto it, $600 is a very affordable way to get into it.
I've seen people on YouTube take the arcade 1-up machines and then mod those to be like main cabinets.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at a true virtual pinball setup, I don't know how many monitors this one has, but a true one has 3 monitors. You have the back glass monitor, which tells you what game you're playing, and then you have a smaller monitor underneath it, which is the dot matrix screen that does your score and all the stuff that scrolls by and all that, and then you have the actual monitor that is the play field. So it can get very expensive depending on how much you want to do. They even have haptic feedback where you feel it shake, rumble in the case. They have it to where it has sensors in it, so you can hit the side and you can bump the table. It is very, very detailed. Tilt. Yeah, exactly. So
this one actually does have, the one from Arcade 1-Up does have the haptic feedback.
Yeah, which is cool. Very cool. So,
you know what else is pretty cool? Getting a bunch of fanboys' hopes up that Firefly will ever come back to television. Here's us again with some breaking news. Firefly has come up again because right now is the Television Critics Association thing that happens where the, new shows are talked about and people, get a chance to talk to executives and all of that. So every time it seems like there's one of these. So just take that with a little grain of salt that this happens about once every couple of years. Somebody asks about Firefly, and for the most part, the answers have always typically been, well, wouldn't that be great? We loved Firefly, blah, blah, blah. But this is the first time, and I pulled only one main quote from this. We've got both Tim Minear, who was the producer on the show, along with Joss Whedon, and then current president of Fox Entertainment, Michael Thorne. And that's the quote that I pulled. And he said, given the success of Fox's reboots of The X-Files, 24, and Prison Break returning this year, he said that he's open to Firefly reboot if Joss Whedon himself wants to revisit it. Madden suspects Whedon is now too busy with movies and would not consider doing Firefly without him. So there was a little bit of that. Then they talked to Tim Minear, and he was like, I'm very interested in doing this. He said it would be this is not a quote. This is me paraphrasing. He was basically like, it would be a challenge to get everybody back. Joss and I have talked about, a series or a show with a couple of the characters on a different adventure, and would that work? But he said the most likelihood of getting everybody who is still alive in the universe back together, would be to do some sort of limited 8 to 10 episode series run. And I think this is a guaranteed win.
I think it would be too, based on what other people say. Again, we've been over this before. I've never seen Firefly. It is a gap in my geekdom, but at this point, I don't intend on filling it just because I feel pressure, and I don't like peer pressure. I don't like when people tell me what to do.
You don't like that all the cool kids like it, and then you're like, well, what if I don't like it? Does that make me not a cool kid?
It's like a Western in space. Cool. I've got that. I've got enough of that in my life, and we'll talk about it later.
It's absolutely right. So all you brown coats out there, along with myself, it's brown coats. See, this is why. So you've not seen the show, so you're not kidding. You don't get all the things. It's okay to get a little excited because what they've said is very promising, and it's true. They mentioned like they talked about it at some point, but then they ended up moving along with the Orville, and they were like, well, we can't have 2 space shows, so tell that to NBC. And they're like, you can't have too many Chicago shows. But anyways, there's a potential for this. Disney now owns them. So, who knows, guys? It's just, hold on to your very fine hats and hope for the best.
Take out the officials counting.
This is a feature presentation.
And now, on with the show.
A long time ago in a galaxy very, very near, and really it was like 3 or 4 weeks ago, the Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker opened over the holidays, and so far has grossed nearly $1 billion globally, about $500 million domestically, doing pretty well everywhere except for China, which, most Star Wars films haven't done well there just because they didn't have the films back in the 70s. But I have seen it 3 times. Some time has passed. James, have you seen it more than once or just the single viewing?
Just the one for me, Chris. I'm not a psychopath. I'm just kidding.
I'm a psychopath.
I've just not found I've not found time to go see it again.
Yeah, I'm lucky that I get a winter break, and so I saw the film, and then like 3 days later, I went back to the theater, used my unlimited Regal pass, saw it again It was a Monday morning, and I saw it at 10:30, and I expected to just walk up, get my ticket, get, like the best seat in the house. And I was really disappointed because the seat that I got was like way at the end on the aisle, and it was almost a sold out show on a Monday, which it was the beginning of like school Christmas break and stuff like that. So it makes sense. But still, it was kind of surprising. And then over the Christmas break on Christmas Day, the family got finished up with their food. And then we went off to the Cinemark, which is the only theater chain that's there. And we saw it once more. And I got to say, the Cinemark in the Rio Grande Valley has some of the best sound I have heard in a long time. There are some of the Jedi voices that I knew were there because of the credits, but I could never clearly hear them like I did at that Cinemark. So kudos to the Harlingen Cinemark for whoever runs your sound there. Because
shout out.
It was fantastic. So here's a little behind the scenes. I did not text James, nor did James text me anything about our feelings about Star Wars. Now, I have put out a little podcast shortly after the movie came out, with some initial thoughts and ideas and stuff. So I'm sure if he's listened to it, which, you know, I don't listen to the show myself. I don't expect James to also listen to it. He's a part of it.
That's true.
So we're kind of going into this like brand new. I don't know if he liked it or not. I don't know if, you know, so we're just going to start off where the movie starts off, and just kind of, tackle a few things. And then I think slowly but surely, I'm going to realize kind of what your overall opinion was. Mm-hmm. But the film starts out with, of course, the title and the first words of the crawl, "The dead speak." So let's talk about Palpatine, because I did not anticipate him being introduced into the movie as being alive and, well, quote unquote alive, like whatever his state of being was at that time. What did you think about just kind of how fast and furious the beginning of this film started?
I thought it opened up pretty well. I assume he is alive, much like Darth Maul is. He was able to get some sort of metal stuff to hold him up, to hoist him up like a robot of some sort. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was good. I thought the way that it started was interesting. I think if JJ would have done the middle movie, it would have opened up a little bit differently. But I think that there was some things that he kind of needed to address, being that there were like multiple Snokes and Snoke was just a puppet. So like the idea that he's dead is not that big of a deal kind of thing.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a pretty good opening. I thought I thought the crawl was, I don't remember exactly what about it I didn't like, but I remember reading it and I was just like, well, that was not very interesting. And it was my least favorite of the crawls, I believe. But other than
I've heard people make comments about that. I feel like it was the pulpiest of all the Star Wars movie crawls. Maybe it just didn't feel the
same. It was just different. I don't know.
Yeah, there was something a little different, because it usually kind of gives us a little bit of the state of things and what's previously happened, and you know, and this was just mostly Palpatine's alive.
Yeah, it was almost oh god, propaganda is almost like how it was written. It was like it was
a little bit.
A caller on the corner handing out newspapers would be yelling what was said there. You know, kind of like,
you know what? That's a good point. It almost also feels in universe as opposed to for us, the viewer. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it almost feels like it was written for the HoloNet or something in Star Wars. Like it was meant for people who live in Star Wars, not the audience. Palpatine's creepy as heck. I was kind of concerned that they were going to use, you know, like he looks different at the beginning of the movie than he does at the end, you know, when he actually kind of becomes more Palpatine like we've seen him.
Right. He sucks their energy here.
Yeah, he looked like my grandma in some ways.
Wow.
Like not.
Sorry, Miss.
I don't know why. Yeah, I was like, I don't know why I thought that when I saw like the quick flashes of light and stuff, and but I did really like that the reveal that it's like, you know, when we saw this, if you didn't see it because you're brave enough not to click links and watch videos, trailers, and stuff, but we had, you know, kind of seen I had already seen that opening scene of him going into that temple, and I was relieved that it happened right at the beginning of the movie.
Yes, yeah,
because I was like, okay, that's done.
Yeah,
we're done.
Really been bad if it was like the last 10 minutes of the movie you watched, but.
I'd be like, yeah, well, he hasn't gone to that place yet and seen Palpatine, so I know he lives until this point.
Kind of like I was with a giant star fleet of rebel ships showing up. So
honestly, let's talk about that at the end. But no, only because you bring up a good point that there are some things in the movie that I was like, man, I wish that wasn't in a trailer.
Right.
Like they could have shown so much other things to get me hyped for this movie, and that could have been different. But I will say that when the fleet arrives and the music cue from John Williams, every time I saw this movie, all the hair on my arm stood up. It was just like it hit all the right points. But the other thing of note, just because I've read the visual dictionary, not cover to cover, but, you know, a little cherry picked here and there, was the fact that is indeed Mustafar that we find Kylo Ren on at the beginning, which is weird because it has all these, you know, all the trees. But in and I don't think JJ intended that to be Mustafar. I think they were like, hey, so JJ, so we had this VR game and it takes place on Mustafar. And if we put the Mustafar planet at the beginning, it'll tie in with this video game we made. He's like, Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, whatever. Granted, we've only seen visually, we've only seen like 2 square miles of Mustafar. So it could be it doesn't have to, unlike, all planets in Star Wars, it doesn't have to be covered by one type of ecosystem.
Yes. Every planet is one biome, James.
Yeah,
that is how it works. I got to, I'm kind of going off. I'm going to go off script just a little bit here, but, the next kind of section after we're introduced to like, okay, Palp's alive. Kylo Ren wants to kill, has to kill Rey now. And the rest of this kind of kicks off the adventure with our crew after a brief introduction, with Rey and her training, little training circuit that she does. I gotta say, I think the chemistry between the main 3 characters is the best it's been in this entire series. Like the opening stuff when they get back from their trip and it's like, the Falcon's on fire, all of it, it's on fire, and it's like, you always do. It's like, man, they're friends. Like, granted, they haven't had any adventures together, at this point, really. Right. I mean, Finn and Poe, but not really, because they split up and went to Canto Bight and all that. So it was just like, oh, see, this is what was missing, like, could we have gotten to this point somewhere in The Force Awakens? Like, can you imagine? I mean, I'm not retconning the whole thing and asking for any kind of redo, but it kind of made me go like, oh, see, yeah, the chemistry is really good.
Yeah, they were. I mean, the whole thing, though. I mean, the only really, as from a chemistry perspective, the only time that I felt like the characters didn't have any chemistry was when they were talking to a person who's dead in real life. So that was really
okay. So let's talk about this. No, let's get into this, because I think there's some interesting things. Some choices had to be made. Obviously Carrie Fisher passed away right at the end of finishing her work for The Last Jedi. So she wasn't around. So we were kind of faced with a couple options. And, one was recast Leia, which would be weird for the very final one. I mean, I know it's like The Matrix, but that makes sense because it's like a computer program. You can recast the Oracle and it'd be fine. For Leia, it's a little different. So they had, totally said, okay, we're not going to do CGI, even though they kind of did. But they decided to go with using her TFA outtakes and deleted scenes, which was weird because like I have watched those deleted scenes so many times that there's a part where in the movie she says, never underestimate a droid. And I was like, oh, I know where that one's,
right. That's
on the DVD.
Yeah, exactly.
The process to which they did this was, I think, fairly successful. There were a couple shots where I was like, ooh, uncanny valley. There was a weirdness to it.
The visual of it made sense to me and looked good, in my opinion. The problem with it was, in my opinion, was the actual dialogue itself. Like, it was like they just said stuff that you wouldn't say in normal like that really didn't. I saw it 3 weeks ago, so I can't really come up with exactly what it was that was said, but it was just kind of like,
I think a second viewing helps on that one, because I think the first time that I watched it, I was so overwhelmed with like, oh, they did a really good job at this. Like this looks really good. Where what they did was they basically only digitally removed her face, and then the rest of her is all CG. And they, copied her, posture and how she moved and stuff on set and just basically redressed her. They also had to work with scenes where Carrie was moving, with like walking around a set. Like when she says never underestimate a droid, she's like walking off camera. And so you had to do these weird things too, where like, Daisy Ridley is on the ground with her book because Leia's eye line was looking down.
Right.
So they had to start her on the ground with a book and then have her stand up to follow just what they had to work with, because they were committed to not messing with any of Carrie's performance, which they did a good job with. The big surprise, I'm just curious about your reaction to when we're back on Octu with Luke, who has somehow longer hair. So I guess Force Ghost hair grows, because if you go back to The Last Jedi, it does not look that long. Anyways, that's not a big deal. He talks about Leia and her training, and then we cut to their nighttime training, and Luke's visor flips up. I was just like, I probably literally gasped. And so I was curious about what you thought of that lightsaber training sequence with Leia.
I mean, I didn't gasp. I'll tell you that. I thought that it was unnecessary personally. Like the whole, like you could have just talked about it. But I guess they have the technology to make everybody look younger now. And then
that's the new thing.
And then didn't Carrie Fisher's daughter played her apparently?
Yeah, Billy Lord.
Billy Lord. That's right. So it's whatever. I just think that I don't know. They could have just left it alone. I don't know. It explained something that didn't need to be explained, in my opinion, but that happens. It
was like, yeah, no, I agree with you, because Star Wars doesn't typically do flashbacks up until The Last Jedi. And you can kind of argue we kind of got that in The Force Awakens with the Force back thing. I just think they did it because it was cool.
Yeah,
and they could.
Exactly.
And they had a good way of doing it with Billy Lord. Mm-hmm. Playing Carrie Fisher. They were both the same age while they shot The Rise of Skywalker as Carrie was when she shot Return of the Jedi.
Wow. Well, there you go.
Yeah. And apparently that training is supposed to happen within that year of Return of the Jedi.
I just don't know where all these kyber crystals came from, man.
From Ilum, man.
They went to
Ilum.
How did he know to go to Ilum to get an orange kyber crystal for Leia?
Well, hers wasn't orange.
Oh, that was raised afterwards. I can't remember. I can't keep these damn lightsabers straight.
We'll talk about her lightsaber is interesting because if you watch it really close before it ignites, it goes blue, green, and then yellow.
Oh, well, I didn't watch it.
So I don't know what.
Maybe it has 3 crystals.
It might. I don't know how
powerful lightsaber.
It doesn't need to make sense. I think that's the great thing.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
But here's the other thing. There are issues in this movie. Mm-hmm. It's kind of just it's a roller coaster mess, but it's also like really fun. And
it's our roller coaster mess.
It is. And I teared up like every time I saw this movie. I love it. But it's a quick, fast paced. It does not let up to breathe. I am holding. Now there was people on the internet like release the JJ cut. I'm like, it's in theaters, you clowns. But I do honestly think that, I've said it before. I think that Disney will do what they did with Endgame right at the end of its theatrical run. Say one last time, come back and see it because now it's got more stuff in it.
I thought they announced that they were going to do that.
Not officially.
Oh,
there's been people throwing that around, but that's not official.
Oh,
but I think that's a good. If they're looking to make some money and you want to get Star Wars fans back in the theaters, that it doesn't. I haven't ruled out that the release the JJ cut thing wasn't a marketing ploy by Disney to drum up interest in a extended director's cut release. Mm-hmm. For them to do that. I would not rule that out. So the big thing that I think a lot of people talked about was Rey's parentage and the reveal on all of that. I need to go back into our archives in S'more Geeks, because when we talked about The Force Awakens, we talked through the potential possibility of Rey being a Palpatine, surely based on the story of the sequel trilogy is about a Skywalker gone is our antagonist, and our protagonist could be a Palpatine. Right. And then looking at some of Daisy Ridley's fighting style, we're like, oh, that's kind of Palpatine's move. That's kind of dark side. What did you think about that all coming to be and finding out that Rey is indeed by blood Palpatine?
Well, I would probably say that we can't take credit for that because we also guessed about 38 other things that were not true, which we were playing.
Come on, but this is the one.
It was a numbers game at that point. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting. I thought that I'm still very confused by it. I don't know. Is she Palpatine's daughter in the fact that he created her out of the Force, or is he like Anakin was? Or
no,
did he sling some back in the pre Order 66 days, and then his kid had a kid? That's where I'm.
Yeah,
confused.
so he has a son, and Rey is the daughter of his son. And the story that I gather is that the son married, and they basically were like, we want no part of you,
right?
and kind of left. And that makes what Kylo Ren told her to be true from his point of view, because Palpatine was in his head, basically saying she's nobody.
Right.
She's nobody.
Right.
She's a junk traders, which is probably what they did to make things, get by. You know, what's interesting though, is Rey, technically her bloodline is from Naboo.
That is true.
It's kind of a cool little kind of full circle kind of thing, in some ways.
I mean, I just don't think it did a great job explaining all that, I don't know. It was fine, but
they need a special edition out, the episode 3, and have, some like concubines, hanging around Palpatine.
Yeah,
we need to see that, like there is there's a woman that sits next to him on that dais in episode 3, that little rising thing. But she's from Onderon or something. No, not Onderon. Gosh, I forget the planet. So she's not human. That's what I'm getting at is the woman that's sitting. People are like, here, people wondering who Rey's mom is. It's this woman. No, it's not, because she's not human, and Rey is clearly human.
Right.
Anyways, I don't think it bothered me that much. I actually, I really enjoyed that it didn't totally retcon The Last Jedi, that she still is explained that she's still from nothing, that yes, her blood that runs through her predisposes her to potentially be more force sensitive, but everything that she's accomplished along this way is still hers, and that she earned that. And then I like the kind of story of, at the end of the film, when she, buries Luke and Leia's lightsabers at the Lars homestead, that she is basically taking up, the Skywalker name as a way of basically saying, like, you get to choose your own family, that the people that really raised her, and taught her things, Leia and Luke. I mean, I know that it's only over the course of like 2 years, but, that there's some cool things that I identify with, and thought that was a really cool thing. Your take on the ending, though? Like, I've got a couple other points, and before we talk favorite and least.
Honestly, I don't remember everything that happened in the end. I really, really enjoyed the Rey passing the lightsaber to Ben.
To Ben.
Yeah, I thought that was very cool. They set that up by the fact that they knocked over the fruit.
Yes.
In the previous scene to find out where she was. I thought that was very cool. I thought Lando was awesome. I will get to a part where I didn't think Lando was awesome. It would be one of my least favorite parts. However, thought Lando was really cool in the movie. I just didn't, I thought that the ending was good. I didn't think that, I didn't have any issue with the ending. I liked that, I like that they wrapped it up. They didn't leave a bunch of unanswered questions. It was just like nice, put in a package and then put away. And I don't know that we will be revisiting these characters anytime soon, because I don't think there's any reason to. So I can see us, in some ways, and maybe the animation or something like Zori Bliss. And, my favorite little guy from this movie is Babu Frick. And like, just every time he talks on screen, I'm cracking up. And super thankful that the Smuggler's Bounty box, the very final one from Funko, their subscription box service, included Babu Frick as one of the exclusive pops in that box. So, hey. I had a question before. We're gonna wrap up this and then talk about Mandalorian. Before we talk about like our favorite parts and least favorite parts. During the fight scene on the old Death Star wreckage, Leia is going into that kind of like trance to kind of the Force, her essence is basically leaving her body to help Ben. At the moment, he's still Kylo Ren, to help him kind of rid himself of Palpatine's influence. That's kind of how I took it. And then the one thing that kind of stood out in my mind, and it's the timing. Rey spins around, stabs Ben, and then they cut to Leia and her body like going limp.
And I was like in my head, like, and maybe no one, I've not seen people talk about this. But maybe it's just an understood thing that I'm just kind of thinking it's more significant than it is. But at that moment when Rey stabs Kylo Ren, did she also via the Force kill Leia?
I don't have any knowledge of the Force to
we're not experts.
To substantiate that statement.
We're not Pablo Hidalgo over here.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe she did. The Force,
the timing of the edit just kind of threw me as being like, oh my God, did she kill Leia?
Yeah, it's well, I'm gonna hold it because it's another least favorite part. But yes, sure, okay. sure. I do want to we'll take a little in memoriam section here to just pour one out for our good buddy Nine Numb, who did not make it out of the battle. He was on the Tantive 4. That's gone. Also, Snap Wexley at some point jumps between an A-wing and an X-wing and crashes, and he dies. I don't know how that happens since he was jumping into an A-wing when they left the planet, but then when he's in the battle, he's on an X-wing. It's not a big deal, but I just want to say to anybody who's a little chubby or has a beard, good luck in Star Wars because you're going to die. Yeah, they don't do well.
It started with Porkins, and then we see it again. It happens in Rogue One. The first person that dies is also a chubby guy with a beard. And then we've got Snap Wexley, who I am a big fan of, and I have his pop and action figures, and still don't have a Black Series 6-inch figure. Come on, Hasbro.
Is Snap Wexley, is that the guy from Heroes who's JJ's friend?
Yeah, it's Greg. Okay. Yeah, it's his kindergarten friend.
Yep.
Greg Grunberg. Anyways, so okay, favorite parts. We'll start with the good stuff. What would you say is your favorite part from the film?
Lando's return. I thought that was awesome to see. I thought he played the perfect amount of a part. And I thought it was very cool. He looks great. Based on what we saw, 5-6 years ago, something like that.
Yes.
You know, somebody's been taking care of him, which is,
he's been hitting the gym though. He
was
taking care of himself
in a wheelchair when we saw him. So
that's correct.
When he was being moved from place to place, but he was able to stand. But yeah, it was just it was good to see him moving. You know, he looked fit. So that was one of my favorite parts. Again, the passing of the lightsaber through and the way that they set that up with the fruit, thought that was great. I thought that my brother didn't agree with this. He thought that the space battle was lacking. I thought that the in-space battle was pretty good. And I think that the way that they buttoned it all up based on the fact that I think some decisions were made in episode 8 that weren't intended from episode 7 that were then kind of fixed or put in a bow. And I thought that was really good. The way that everything kind of came together and was finalized. There's no dangling issues. There's no like weird stuff. I mean, there's the will they, won't they with Rey and Finn. There's still that kind of thing going on, but
Finn is spoken for. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Okay. But anywho, yeah, I thought the ending wrapped it all up very well.
I agree.
And to where I don't think that they need to be messing with it anymore, kind of thing.
I agree. I think that JJ was handed like this impossible puzzle, to not only wrap up the trilogy, but then the trilogy of trilogies, and then also like make the people that want this to happen happy, and make this people that want this to happen, and people who hated The Last Jedi. Can I wink at them a couple times, that say, hey, hey, look at this. Luke thinks the lightsaber is important too now, So, but yeah, no, I think those are all some of my favorite parts. I think this is C-3PO's best movie. I think that he is his comedy is the best it's ever been. I think he plays a nice important role. So I think a lot of 3PO stuff really lands. I like that R2-D2 was in a lot more. I'm a big droids fan. I really like that when Rey heals the serpent in the cave and tells BB-8, I just gave him a little bit of my life to save him. You do the same. And then when we get onto Ochi's ship and he sees Dio there, he revives Dio by giving him some of his power. And I was like, oh, look at that. Look, little storyline going through. I like that. I love everything on Kijimi. I think that was a really cool planet. Also RIP everybody on Kijimi, with the exception of Zori Bliss and Babu Frick. Everything Babu Frick was great. I like his reappearance at the end of the film when we see Zori Bliss piloting the Y-Wing and he's like, hey! I was like, yes. I'm going to agree with your brother a little bit on the end battle, only because it has a lot of missed opportunities. I got really excited when Wedge showed up on screen and nobody else knew who he was.
Right.
And at least in my viewing, they were like, who was that? And why did you get so excited? I'm like, God, it's Wedge. He's like the only pilot that escaped the Death Star 1 and 2 and
Gavin,
all that. But here's why I got excited, because I was like, oh crap, they're about to do the thing that I hope they do. Go around and see, let us see inside the ships of other people. And maybe they had more of that. They just didn't include it in the movie because it was already running long. But I was really hoping to see like inside the Ghost. And another favorite part is the Ghost survives the battle and we see it land at the end celebration, which I'd missed my first two viewings of seeing it land. And I was like, furiously looking for it. And then the third time I saw it, I was like, oh, it's right there. It's like clear as day, landing right in middle of frame. I was like, okay, good. So whoever's piloting the Ghost, I presume Hera and her son Jason, but that was cool. A lot of it, I agree with you. I like the idea that Ben Solo's mind was so occupied by Palpatine the whole time. And that's rewatching The Force Awakens, and seeing him talk to the helmet, and he's like, show me again, grandfather, the power of the dark. And, I'm like, it's not him, he's like, and that also makes so much sense because Anakin became a Force ghost. He's a good guy. So Anakin's not talking to him. So it's clearly had to have been somebody else. So I think those are my favorite things. James, do you have any least favorite moments? You kind of hinted at that.
Well, you have to have least favorite moments if you have good favorite moments, so a few. In the very end of the movie, when they land back on the thing and Lando gets off the ship and goes sits down next to Jaina. They haven't met. They haven't talked to each other. Jaina says, where are you from? Lando says, whatever system. He says, where are you from? She says, I don't know. And then he says, well, why don't we find out? What? What a weird line. What a weird thing for an 80-year-old man to say this 20-year-old lady.
It feels creepy, and that's because there's storyline that's cut out of the movie. I'm sure. The visual dictionary says that after the war, Lando settled down and had a family, had a baby girl. The girl was kidnapped and went missing, and he went looking for her. Right. Now, had that information been a part of the movie, I took that scene is the less creepy.
I know that's why it's like that, but it was so off-putting in the theaters. I was just like, whoa. Another thing that I didn't like the ships showing up being spoiled for me in the trailers. It just goes to what I've been preaching for forever is I hate watching trailers. And then I've had a couple other things pop into my head that I've forgotten. But the number one thing that really annoyed me about this movie is the fake Chewie death. It was awful. Yes. It was so awful. There was one ship. That ship took off. That ship got shot.
No, there are two.
Okay, whatever.
There are two.
Whatever.
I've seen it 3 times.
But both of them were sitting in the same spot?
Yes.
I don't know. It was awful. It was awful the way that they did it.
Yeah. I won't disagree with you on that. He doesn't pull a fast one and only show you one ship and then see it take off.
It was super cheap.
I agree.
And I thought it was the worst moment in all of Star Wars.
All of Star Wars? Really?
That is the worst moment in all of Star Wars, in my opinion.
Jedi rocks in Jabba's palace?
That's fine. I would rather watch that 10 times than see that scene again. It's awful. Awful. It cheapened the whole thing of the dark side taking over in Rey and the consequence of that actually happening. And then it's like, it's just fine. It's fine. No big deal. That happens. Sometimes we lose our temper, Rey.
Right.
I hated it.
You know what? If I could potentially pitch like a redo where we see both ships take off and you're not sure which one Chewie's on, and we see her rip apart one,
because either way she killed innocent people, right?
Right.
So
right. I mean, I think the response is that, you know, oh my gosh, this power and I killed innocent people, and Chewie could have been on that ship,
right?
You know, and Poe could have been like he wasn't on that one, you know, or something, you know.
Yeah.
And she should have felt Chewie on the ship, because she senses him from a really far distance on the Star Destroyer when he later.
Yeah. I did just come up with the last thing. These movies need to stop in changing the technology that exists, being that in the last one, hyperspace is used as a weapon. Why didn't we just strap hyperspace rockets to asteroids and launch them at the Death Star? Could have saved a lot of lives. And then
it's faking in space.
And then in this one, when Poe's in his X-Wing and he's running from the TIE fighters and he's hopping from space to space, the TIE fighters are somehow following him. I don't know if they're joining him in his wormhole that's being created and popping through, or if they have their own hyperdrive engines and just somehow know where he's going to pop out because they don't have a tag on his ship like they did in Last Jedi, so that they knew where the ship was popping out. And then he hyperdrives through that worm and the worm's fine. So it really just messed with the whole idea.
I think it looked cool. The explanation for the TIE fighters is the First Order TIE fighters do have hyperspace engines, unlike the original Imperial ones, which throws a weird thing that Kylo Ren or Ben Solo shows up at at Exegol in a Imperial TIE fighter, which I assume he got from the Death Star wreckage. Those do not have hyperspace engines. It just looked like a cool shot. You know, if JJ had just asked the story group, like, hey, what old ship from the Death Star could be there that, you know, they could have done a TIE Advanced, and then, you know, we'd been fine.
Yeah, but, I mean, I just don't understand why they were able to know exactly where he hopped out of hyperspace, I guess is my issue.
Yeah, I think it's just that saying, like, in the last movie, we had hyperspace tracking, and now they still do. So that's the explanation that I kind of took from that.
Yeah, but they had a tracker on the ship. Did we have? I guess they might have.
I think it's like a hyperspace signature.
Oh.
I think it's kind of like how it works in The Mandalorian, that you've got, like, you know, the child doesn't have like an implant because they could have just removed that. It's some sort of life signature.
I think that they didn't think about it and it just looked cool, Chris.
That's fine. Literally, James, like there are so many things that we didn't talk about in this film, and that's okay. You know, there's other podcasts for that. I love this movie. I you know, it's the, you know, the most recent one. And then I'll be like, you know what? I really like, you know, I watched Rogue One the other day in 4K and I was like, God, this movie's good. You know, like, I love Star Wars in any of its forms for the most part. And, we'll dig it. I do feel like the film is it just feels a little rushed. It feels the pace is a little big, and, you know, I kind of do hope that they revisit this with a slightly extended version, you know, that even if it's for just the home release, something that it's like an option, like watch the theatrical or watch the extended, you know, I think that would be a good thing, just to let stuff breathe and let other storylines kind of play out a bit better. Yeah.
The three movies as a whole just feel so disjointed, in my opinion. It's just a little odd. I think if you watch them all
visual style.
Yeah. It's just, and if you were to watch episode 7, 8, and 9 in a row, it would feel. I don't know that it would flow, because I watched 8 right before I went and saw 9, and it just didn't flow into the next one very well. Number 9 cheapened things that occurred in number 8, and you know, to try and make it into one story, which it needed to do. I just feel like. Right. In the future, if we're making 3 movies, we need to have a more solid script for all 3 of them, and then make these movies. I think obviously rewrites can happen, but it's just, I felt like this was written in 3 different rooms by 3 different people. That was just kind of, I don't know.
It's valid. That's a valid opinion.
Shared like a weekly 1-hour phone call, and then after that they couldn't talk. You know what I mean? Like
that makes sense.
It was like, so you got the main points all filtered through, but a lot of things that happened that were big moments in one movie were diminished in others, I felt.
Sure. Well, we've run out of time to talk about The Mandalorian, which is fine. We can save that for another time. But kind of, I think we both share the opinion that that this era of Star Wars is done. being told. So if you're wondering kind of where does this all lead us, the next thing that we're going to start seeing out of Star Wars is something they're calling Project Luminous, which I've heard that the information about that is coming soon. But the rumors are that this will be a story period set about 400 years prior to the events of the movies and stuff we've already seen, in an era they're calling the High Republic era. So this is still old, but we're not going back into the old Republic. And then the other rumors that we're hearing are that those upcoming films, the one that's still slated for 2022, that these are kind of standalone stories that will go, they'll kind of connect, that they'll all be a part of the same thing, but it's not necessarily like a saga. They're not going to start fresh up out of the bat with like a brand new trilogy is kind of the word on the street, the rumors, but we'll find out more about that pretty soon when Project Luminous comes, when the news hits on that one. We'll talk about Mandalorian, on another show, but because we teased it earlier in the episode, James, what were your just kind of overall thoughts of the series as a whole and kind of how it ended?
I thought it was pretty good. I think the way that it ended has issues, like I think most things do, and everything does. Nothing's perfect, but I think if we're putting two things that I just compared together, I would say that Mandalorian is better. I had more positive feedback for Mandalorian than I did for the episode 9.
I agree.
A condensed version, but we can talk about that on another episode.
Yeah, we'll go in depth on that one on another show.
Let's look around the region and take our pick of the week.
Shut up and take my money.
All right, it's towards the end of another episode of the show, and we can't end without having a pick of the week, which is essentially our stamp of approval on something that we have recently watched or played or experienced. And out of tradition, James, why don't you go first?
I will go first, and I apologize ahead of time for this pick because we have two very similar picks, not in content, but just in distribution method and order that it's coming out. Mine is You Season 2. I loved season 1 of this show. It's a Netflix show about essentially a stalker who thinks he's like the nicest, coolest individual in the world, but really he's a murderer. So it's kind of like Dexter, but without the moral high ground that Dexter had. But I thought I think it's a really good show. And season 1 was I think we talked about this before, but season 1 was actually a Lifetime show. And then it got picked up. It got picked up by Netflix, so no one ever saw it. I always thought it was just a Netflix show. But yeah, it's season 1 is a little weird just because it was on TV, so it has these awkward breaks, kind of fade outs and
for commercials,
that season 2 doesn't have. But yeah, it's good show. Good show.
So yeah, my pick is also a Netflix show, and it came out Christmas Eve, and it's Lost in Space, because I am a sucker for any type of show that is basically Swiss Family Robinson in outer space, because that's essentially what Lost in Space is. But like things like Battlestar Galactica, one of my favorite shows growing up on NBC was Earth 2. It followed a very similar format and structure. Lost in Space season 1 was one of my favorite shows of the past year or two. And Lost in Space season 2 really delivers on a lot of areas. It gives characters a lot of growth. They're in like different situations in a much bigger scope. And what's funny is I think that while it looks more expensive, they probably, because of how they shot this next season, they may have saved a little money just based on there's a lot of stuff that are, filmed on sets, because the first season was outdoors a lot more and location shooting can be a lot more expensive. But Lost in Space season 2 is really, really good. Lost in Space, the first season I watched like a couple episodes and took a break. And this one was like maybe a 2-sitting binge where I watched a bunch at once and then revisited the next day to wrap things up. And then it ends on a giant cliffhanger, which I'm excited, but I know it's going to be like a year and a half before we see another season. And that's kind of the downfall with binging. If had I been watching this week by week, I would be having that thought like 10 or 13 10 weeks later, but I highly recommend it if you love space stuff. I gotta say, watching it though, after watching the finale of The Mandalorian, I was like, Lost in Space kind of feels more premium. Like, I don't know what it is, but it feels more expensive. So I know that The Mandalorian did really well for Disney Plus. So I'm hoping they reinvest that money, because while it looks fantastic and is fantastic, Lost in Space has a feel to it that I'm just like, God, this feels expensive, which, it's a weird thing.
It's got weight to it.
It's got some weight.
It's heavy.
You can feel it. It's got some heft. But that about does it for the podcast this week. We hope that you would join us over on our Facebook page, on Twitter, Instagram, and also on Podchaser. So you can just do a search for us on all those platforms. We're facebook.com/The Geek State and The Geek State Podcast on Instagram. We'd love to have you there because you're a part of this. Your conversations, your messages and comments and stuff like that affect the show, and we want you to be a part of it. So join us on all our social platforms. We'd love to see you there. And from all of us here at the Geek State, stay excellent to each other, and we'll see you next time.
Might I introduce myself? I am C-3PO Human Cyborg Relations. And you are?
Okay, that's going to be a problem.
Hello, I Bubble Freak.
Why, hello.
You know what they always say, 4th or 5th time is a charm.
Do they say that, though?
They would if they messed up the first 4 times.